Okay, morning everyone. Thanks for being here. This is our first practical session devoted to the iNaturalist prac. We are going to start by doing a quick tour of the iNaturalist website, and I'll show you some of the features and functions. I'll demonstrate a data download for you guys. And then we've got some excellent questions that have come through, and we will answer those also. So let me start by sharing my screen with you, and I'm just going to share a web browser here. Okay, there we go. And we are going to go to iNaturalist.org. Okay, I'm already logged in here, but what it'll look like when you guys arrive here, it'll look something like this. Okay, the first step that you'll need to do is you'll need to sign up for it. Okay. Once you've signed up, you're able to download data. You're also able to make identifications. You're also able to upload your own data. I'm going to log in. Luckily, it doesn't show you my password. And I'm going to go to Explore. You see it up here in the top menu. We're going to use this just as a bit of an illustration. The first thing that the most striking thing here that you see is this map of the world with darker, redder cells indicating more observations, lighter cells less, and then the white cells indicating no observations. Now, funny enough, it doesn't let us zoom out any more than this, but you can kind of see the definite hotspots of where there are lots of observations and the definite cold spots. You can also see here on the right-hand side just a selection of observations. And when you hover over it, it'll show you where that observation was from. You can see this one is from Europe. This observation, we'll have to do that. You can see that came from the western side of the US. And what's neat here is that you can see that iNaturalist covers many taxa. So yes, there are plant species, there are mammals, insects, fish, all sorts of taxa for which people might be making observations. Speaking of that, you can see here 67 million observations. Obviously, there is some serious geographical bias here. There is not a lack of biodiversity in this region of Central Africa, but yet there are absences of recordings. Over 300,000 species have been identified and recorded. That is a small fraction of the world's species, but it is still pretty impressive considering this is citizen science. These are observations made by anyone, making these observations available freely to everyone else. So nearly 200,000 people have identified species, and over 1.5 million different people have submitted observations. So this is a pretty impressive global science activity. Okay, let's maybe get a bit more specific. I'm going to scroll up here again. If anyone wants to suggest a species that they'd like to find something about, feel free to drop it in the chat function. Anybody got a favorite species? And maybe we can start with any taxon, but maybe if there's a plant species you're particularly interested in. Any suggestions? What have we got here? Okay, Sapphire, you've said orchids, and Connie, you've said mopani. Okay, let's do this. Let's look at both of those, and we'll go with first the orchid family. And the nice thing is there you see it auto-completes. I can choose Orchidaceae, and there we get a global map of where there have been observations of orchids. Interestingly, you can see 7,000 species. 12,000 different people have identified orchid species, and nearly, isn't that quite amazing, just over 400,000 observations. You can see hotspots of where people have reported orchids would probably be the Alps. You can see Southwestern Cape comes up. You can see here the Andes. And then I guess that's the Appalachians in the US. Southwestern Australia, lots of observations. What's cool is that you can then have a look at, these are the individual species that have been recorded. You can see them by clicking here, for example. Okay. And you can see, for example, this orchid here, there have been nearly 15,000 observations, right? We can scroll down and we can see, for example, these species, there have been 1,000+ observations. And as we go lower and lower, and I hope I'm not inducing an epileptic fit in anyone with a flashing screen, here we, for example, have the table-mounted red Dyza uniflora, with only 386 observations. Let's zoom in on this then. So now it's showing us just the observations for Dyza uniflora. You can see it here. It's only obviously one species. There have been 386 observations, and look at that. They are all here in the fynbos biome. Okay. We can zoom in if we want. Maybe you decide you'd like to go look for an orchid. And you can see some of them, unfortunately, have very poor coordinates. And I'm actually going to talk about why there are these poor coordinates. You can see they're round and they're round and like shaded. There's a very specific reason for that, and I'm going to get to those later. You can zoom in and you can see here, look, many of these observations are on Table Mountain. Okay. Let's stick with this, and I'm going to click on this observation here, because you can see, look here, this observation is in the sea. Look here, this observation was made in 1985, so that's well before handheld GPSs were a thing. We can see the username of the person who made the observation. We can also see how low the accuracy is. So we're uncertain where within the circle this was made, and there's this beautiful picture of the orchid. We can see who has identified the species. And we can also, this is something that you guys will see, we can also suggest what the phenological stage is. Okay, and the phenological stage here is obviously it's flowering. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to select, I'm going to say this is a flowering individual. Okay. Now, more interestingly, let's click on the species name here. And iNaturalist is really interesting because it'll be able to collate, bring together information from all over. Tace, I'm going to answer I'm going to get most of the questions later, but to answer yours, because I think it's such a fundamental one. This is citizen science project. Anyone can submit observations, anyone can make identifications or suggest identifications. What I did here with tagging that photo as being in the flowering stage, anyone can do that. Okay, let's see what we know of Dyza uniflora. We can see specific to iNaturalist who's made the most observations, who's identified it the most frequently, etc. We can see there are 391 observations, and we can view them all. We can see that this species is mostly recorded in February, and that suggests that it's really easy to identify when it's flowering. and really hard to identify, or even really hard to see the rest of the time. We can look at history. So this is when these observations were made. Unsurprisingly, we get more observations now when lots of people are using the app, using the website and the app. And we can click on plant phonology, which is something that's very interesting and relevant here. And you can see most of the flowering observations are in February, January, February. So that's obviously when this is flowering. There's some other cool things here. It links with other websites to provide general information. We can see a map of the species. We've already seen this one. Okay. We can look at the taxonomy. So for this species, there are no subspecies, but in other species, it'll give you the different subspecies, and you can sort your observations by that. You can look at the status. This is something we're going to come back to for another example that I've got in mind. We have no conservation status for this taxon, which means that it is not currently endangered. And then very useful if you're trying to identify things is it can show you other species that people sometimes get confused. Now, obviously, for this amazing species, you're not going to confuse it with these. Okay, let's have a look at now. What were some of those? Let me just find. There was the Venus Flytrap, someone asked. Let's have a look at that. See what we can learn about it. So I'm going to go back to Explore, although I could also type it here, but let's go to Explore. And we'll type in Venus Flytrap. Okay. And you can already see that it's the genus Dionea. And I know for certain that that's the species, Muscipula. Now, the important thing to remember here is that this represents where people have observed the species. You can see clearly, like nothing in Asia, Australia, Africa, Europe. Here in North America, this is where the species has been observed. Now, the interesting thing is here, is this a species of their southeast? And we have a few observations made here, or is this really a species that occurs across the whole of the United States? This is obviously something that we could look into. We could go and click on this observation. We'll try again. Click on the observation. Let's click on it. And let's see what we can find out. Okay, well, that's definitely the Venus flytrap. Interesting up here, you can see VU for vulnerable. Vulnerable in the United States is on the IUCN Red List. There's an exclamation. Look at this. Introduced to this area in Washington State. Arrived in the region via anthropogenic means. Isn't that interesting? So that means that this observation, and I'm going to just go back a step, this observation here, they're saying to us this is an alien species here. Okay. And my guess is that we're going to find the same here for this area in California. Let's click on it. Let's try click on it. There we go. And I'm going to guess we're going to get the same answer here again. There we go. Introduced. So that means that this species' natural distribution is this region over here. Now, if I remember correctly, it's mostly in marshes in the Carolinas. So I think this is probably its natural distribution. Okay. Yeah, that was a fun species to look at. And the other one that I wanted to look at for you guys. Enrica, you suggested Strelitzia reginae. That's interesting. Very interesting, in fact. Let's just take Catharanthus roseus and paste that one in. Of course, you guys can all There we go, the Madagascar Periwinkle. You can see already it recognizes that there are different varieties. This variety, there's 16 observations, this one there 4. Let's just go with the main species for now. So far I know there are any taxon that can be observed. So I don't think you're going to get like microorganisms here, because those would be really hard to photograph from your cell phone. Wow, so this is the distribution of the Madagascar periwinkle, and you can see a very wide global distribution. We can find that same kind of information again. Oh, okay, Kenneth says there are microorganismal data. That's very interesting. So let's click on our species. Click on our species again. And again, we've got our list of species that are commonly misidentified. This is going to link, for example, in this case, to Wikipedia, and it suggests where you can find more information. Taxonomy, like we said here, you can see there are 2 varieties. Now, there are only 20 cases where the species has been identified to variety level. The rest of our where is it? The rest of our 6,500 observations haven't been identified to variety level. That's interesting. So here, it appears that this is a species that maybe has dioeciousness or monoeciousness, that sex is an option here. But you can see, there we go. So it's telling us that there were 6 female plants, 9 that couldn't be determined, 7 female plants. Okay, I'm not sure how accurate this is, especially since there are several thousand observations that haven't been categorized. And again, we can look at phonology, and you can see that across this global distribution, it seems to flower mostly in April. Okay, but that's maybe something that one has to look at within a region. Okay. So far, yeah, that's a good question. You say some of the observations have got a speaker logo, and that's because you're not limited to just submitting images. You can also submit sounds. So for frogs and birds and certain insects and bats, people will submit sounds as proof of an observation. Okay, I think I've actually demonstrated a lot of what I wanted to show you. Let me show you different species. Euphorbia varioides. So this is a species that is of interest to me. Some of my students have done research on it, and it's a nice example of understanding, for example, a species distribution based on iNaturalist observations. So you can see here, sorry, this keeps popping up. You can see here that this species very much seems to be endemic to South Africa and Lesotho, right? No observations outside of South Africa and Lesotho. And this is interesting because it's often described as occurring in Botswana also. So that raises some interesting questions. And I think the first question we've got to raise is, well, is there enough data on iNaturalist to conclude that it doesn't occur in Botswana? Now, one of the things that we can do here, let's go to the species page again. And we'll go to the map option. And you see when you go to the map option here, you get just a little bit extra options. See here in the top right corner, there are layers. Okay. And you can see here, this includes verifiable observations. So these are ones that have been made on iNaturalist and are verifiable. In other words, we know where the photo was taken and it can be identified. You can see that you can choose to include or exclude captive or cultivated individuals. So, for example, you don't want to know which botanical gardens have things like that. But you can also turn on data from GBIF, which is a repository of scientific observations. So it has more observations than iNaturalist, and it, for example, extracts data from published articles, things like that. And in fact, iNaturalist will submit its highest quality observations to GBIF for consideration. But what we can do is we can also turn on observations from GBIF, and you can see there that when we include published records, our distribution doesn't actually change much. Okay, we get one that's a little bit further west than the others. These are all a little bit further west. But again, nothing that makes it into Botswana. So that's an interesting kind of question. You can see, in fact, when you go to the Wikipedia entry, it says it is native to Botswana, Lesotho, and South Africa. And that doesn't seem to be the case. Okay. Again, just to show you for interest, we can look at the phonology of this species with a clear peak here in August. So that's when they flower. If you want to see these amazing cushion plants covered in yellow flowers, that's a good time to go look. Okay, I'm going to show you one more example. This time, Allopegulae. Does anyone know anything about Allopegulae? Has anyone heard of it? Yes, Rowan, that's spot on. So Allopegulae is one of the few species that we could maybe consider, we could consider it a Gauteng endemic. It does occur in the Northwest province also, but since the Gauteng is such a small province, we will treat it as an honorary endemic. You can see its distribution here, and you can see, look here, in Pretoria East, there was an observation made. And I'm going to zoom in on that. Oh, what happened? Do you guys see how that happened there? There's the square showing where it is. We zoom in. Oh, it's turned into a green dot. Let's zoom in. Let's zoom in. Okay. Now, why is this dot green? Why aren't we seeing a green pin there? Okay. Let's click on sorry, I got distracted by a point there. Let's click on Allopegulae, and here also for this observation, there's a green dot and a big square. Okay, what's happening there? Let's click on the species name and get some data just for that species. And the first thing that strikes us here, endangered. Okay, it's got a red flag to show that this is a species that is very endangered. Now, let's have a look here at its status. Globally endangered, and what is CR again? Critically endangered? I'm trying to remember now. Within South Africa, critically rare. Thanks, Kenneth. And because of this, look at this. We haven't seen this before. Geoprivacy, it's obscured. So because it is an endangered species and a critically rare species, its exact locations are hidden. If you are a researcher working on this species, there are ways to go about requesting the exact data. And that's why on the map, we only get the rough distribution. When we zoom in, when we zoom in, you'll see that those exact locations disappear. We get these fuzzy circles again. It is where either the observer has said, I'm not going to give the exact location because I don't want someone trespassing on this land or visiting a dangerous location or something like that. And here, because it's red, it's because it's critically endangered. So we know the species occurs in this area, but we're not given the exact locations. Interestingly enough, I saw in the chat there was a lot of talk about people identifying things wrongly or getting things wrong. Look down here in the Western Cape. There, somewhere between Stellenbosch and Belleville, is observation. We can click on it. Let's view it. And you see it's just telling us a very rough area. Now, it's totally possible that this has been misidentified. Okay, let's see what the notes say about it here. These two observers suggest that it is Allopeglaray. I mean, we could ask an expert, but I would say this probably counts as a misidentification. You can see there are multiple photos. So I think this is a misidentification and something that I'll pass on to Mr. Arnold Frisbee, who's our curator of the CICAD collection, because he's working on them. And he could then, if he disagrees, come and write a comment here saying, no, I disagree. Yes, Kenneth, 100%. It could also have been planted, in which case someone should have tagged this as being a cultivated individual. Okay, hopefully that all makes sense to you. What I'm going to suggest we do now, sorry, another thing. Let's go back to Explore. Let's imagine that you are specifically interested in the plant species of Rietvlei Nature Reserve. Okay, we can also limit ourselves. Rietvlei, why is that not? Let's try this, Rietvlei Nature Reserve. There we go. It recognizes, no one has submitted a shapefile to give its outline, but it recognizes the rough location. And it says there have been 83 observations made within this region of 63 species. Okay, and you can see it includes just the genus Aster, so nothing specific yet. Includes a Cape house snake, an invasive grass genus. We could click here to see all those species. Okay, and yeah, some of the obvious ones have been identified. The hibiscus genus here, it probably means the indigenous hibiscus species. We could also then limit this, if we want, to the plant kingdom. So I click there. The important thing here is you have to first set your location, then your taxon. You can see, well, about 22 species have been recorded. Sorry, about 19 species. Okay. Let's have a look. We could see what those are, and we can even see exactly where they are in the reserve. And you can see they, interestingly, all seem to have been made at the same spot. Yeah, they've all been made at the same spot. I'm guessing that is on a nature walk or, wait, that is, there we go, it even tells us. It's at the fishing clubhouse. Okay. And I think that makes sense because you can't walk around in the reserve unless you're doing research there. So for average observers, you're going to be making observations where you can get out and walk around. Okay. Let's choose a location with a few more species. Let's remove Rietvlei and let's say something broad. Let's say Fairy Glen Nature Reserve. Right, so that's there. Just past the N1 highway. Let's see how many plant observations have been done in Fairy Glen. There we go. That's a good number. Roughly within this area, and we could actually make this more accurate. We could stretch this bounding box. In fact, let me show you guys this trick. This is quite neat. We should be able to. Okay, we'll stick with this for now, but there we go. You can do the redo search in map, and it's just going to show you all the observations within this area that your map covers, your screen covers. So yes, that makes a lot more sense. 1,100 observations. Okay. Now, one of the points that you guys have been raising is that we want to be able to download these observations. And of course, that's really a critical part of your assignment. So how do we do that? So we're interested in downloading these observations here. One of the things that we can do, and this is a little bit of a complex way, you can, of course, just search for iNaturalist export. So, for example, this link pops up automatically for me. And that link is in your assignment. But otherwise, to find the download, you go to Filters. We can talk about these filters in a moment. But here you see Download. And that takes you to this export page. And then all of the rest of this reflects what you've done on the previous page. Okay, and this is the same as the search query strings that we've given you. So here you can see that search query string, quality grade equals any. Okay, in our assignment, we are using research grade, in other words, where it's been identified by 2 or more people. We could change that here, for example. Look what happens when we click research grade. Quality grade says research now. Identifications equals any. That's also something that we're doing differently. We want most observers to agree, right? Because we don't want someone to have entered a bad identification and then that come up. So we want where most people agree on the identification. And then, for example, here we have the southwest latitude, the southwest longitude, and you can see those values. Sorry, you can see the values here. Okay, which set the bounding box or the area where it's being identified. Oops. Here we have taxon ID. Sorry, I'm trying to show you here, taxon ID, and this is saying we only want plant species. Okay. Now, what I want you to note here is that when you paste a search string in here, these values up here pop up, and vice versa. If we change something here, let's say we want to set the captive or cultivated to no, then our text string updates. Okay. Now, there are certain things that don't quite work. So if you put in a place name here, so let's clear the location, and we're going to try put a place name in, and let's say Fairy Glen Nature Reserve. Whoops. Fairy Glen Nature Reserve. Click. What it's done now is it's generated a place ID. And if the location that you've put in doesn't have a place ID, then you're not going to see a place name here. That doesn't mean, for example, when you add latitude and longitude, that the place doesn't exist. It just means you won't see a name here because it doesn't have a set place name. Okay. You can, for example, change months. If we only want observations made in December, you can see it now says month equals 12. And maybe we say December 2020, then it adds a year. Okay. So for your assignment, what you will be doing is you will be pasting in the search strings, and there will be a few tiny things that you modify in there. We can have a look at those a little bit later if it's causing any confusion. Okay. Tani, I see your question. Let me quickly grab the search string here, and I will show you how that would work. So I'm just grabbing a search string. This is for Golden Gate Highlands National Park. I'm just pasting it in there. I press tab just so that it has time to adjust. You can see here under the second step, under preview, it's already showing us some of the species that occurred there, and it shows us that there were 498 observations, not 498 species. You were saying, how do we change the radius? Well, we look for the radius part here, and we go from 4, for example, to 16. Press tab again, just so that we move out of it. And you can see we've now gone up to 598 observations. Okay. Good, and we would do the same. Like if there's an argument for month here, have we got an argument for month here? Let's set it now that we say yes, we want observations from January. Here you can see it says month equals 1. We can change that to month equals 6, for example. And now you see what's happened though, is we've lost the place. This does sometimes happen. You need to be careful that when you change, sorry, I'm doing that the wrong way, aren't I? We need to bring our search string back. There we go, Golden Gate again. And you can see it doesn't show a place name because we've given it its central latitude, central longitude, and radius. Okay. But we're going to make sure we keep that latitude and longitude. We change the radius to, for example, 16. There we go. Everything is good. Let's try add a month again. Might be that we've just confused this. We'll first say month. There's no month. Yeah, and you see we've lost our latitude and longitude again. So you just have to be careful when you do this. Okay. Pay attention to what's included here or what isn't. What I'd suggest is that we refresh this. Okay. And now we can set the month. Oh, wait, sorry, we're back to Fairy Glen, aren't we? So let's paste Golden Gate in again. There we go. Now we can add a month, say December. There you can see we got our month argument. And we have lost our Golden Gate again. Okay, so what we can see here is that you need to be careful. You actually would need to add the month into the text string. Okay, so we're just going to go and month equals, whoops, month equals 12. Oh, it's giving us some grief there. Luckily, you've got the search strings that you need for this. So use them, but I think the important point here is to see that yes, this does cause some trouble. You need to watch out. Here we've got our latitude, our longitude, our rank, we've got our month. We go down to our preview, and for some reason, it's telling us your export is too big. In other words, it's forgotten that we've got our latitude and longitude set here. Let's try export this nonetheless. I want to show you guys what the next step would be. You've got all of these. So let me just check that there are no big questions coming through. There's a lot of data associated with each observation. I'm going to turn all of those off, although it's worth noting that observed on gives you the date on which the observation was made. So if you want to know which month it was made in, that's the best way to check it. There's a whole bunch of geographic information. Again, you don't need any of that, okay? But we could, for example, say, let's include town name if there is. Again, we don't need that for now. In terms of taxon, this is the only one that you really need, and you want to click scientific name. Okay. There are a whole bunch of extras related to taxonomy that aren't important, but are there if you're interested in them. And then you can click number 4, create export. Okay. Now, depending on how many other people are using the website and how good your connection is, sometimes that process of generating the export is fast, sometimes it's a bit slow. Here you can see we've got our search string, research grade quality. We want identifications to agree. We don't want captive or cultivated. That's the coordinates for Golden Gate and a 4-kilometer radius. Taxon ID, just the plants. We only want observations that have been identified to species level. And then this is something that we added. This D2 is we're saying we only want observations before Sunday so that we don't have differing answers that you give and that the memo gives, and we only want them for December. We click download. It's downloaded a zip file, so a compressed file. Click on that. There we go. We've got a comma separated value format file, a CSV file. Oh, sorry, you guys can't see that. Sorry, let me just show you what that looks like. In Windows, when you click on the CSV file, it'll open and it'll say there's your Excel file. You see comma separated values. And then when I double click on that, I open Excel. And here you can see then the date that the observations were made, the town name, and of course these are made in a national park, so they're not in a specific town. That's why we don't see anything there. And there we see our species, a whole bunch of really interesting grassland species. You can note here, all of these observations were made in the 12th month, so that's quite nice. Okay, what one would have to do, so there's instructions about how to determine how many observations there were. You can see here we cover 23 rows, so there are 23 observations. We can also select these, go to data, and there's a very useful button here, remove duplicates. Click on that. We are happy to continue with our current selection. Remove duplicates from column C. 5 duplicates were removed. 18 unique values remain. That 18 then is the number of species that were recorded in December within that 4-kilometer radius. Okay. Good. Let's get to your questions. I think that is what we needed to cover. I know Kenneth's been answering many. Thank you for that. Okay, so Arnie, you were asking about, can anyone submit? Yes, anyone can submit. If I remember correctly, you can there's a reputation score for observers. So if everyone was disagreeing with your observations, there might be a bit of a reputation that develops. Oh, okay, not in iNaturalist, sorry, yes. Kilabongile, you're saying, should we always say in the 12th month? No. Only when you're looking at the phonology data do you specify the months. Okay, Tace, yes, you had a question about how to store your data. That really is up to you, and it's one of the skills that is super important for scientists to have is data management, right? One of the really useful things in Excel is that you could store data in different columns, or you could store data in different worksheets. So for example, just to show you here, you could rename this tab to something like Golden Gate 4-kilometer radius December, right? And then you could have a next import that you do. You could have, Golden Gate 8-kilometer December. Okay, but of course, as we've said, you're not going to be doing this for different months except for the phonology data. Sapphire, you ask, do we only need scientific names for all of the data sets we download? Yes, if you are following the instructions exactly as in the practical, as in the document, the PDF that we have available for you guys, then yes, that's all that you need. But you'll see that I also replied to your question on the discussion board. And if you want to try do a shortcut at your own risk for downloading the phenological data, you'll also need to include the observed date so that you can split your data set by month. Okay, let's see. Yes, I totally hear you that you're saying the instructions are overwhelming. It's a big assignment. It's a lot of skills that we're asking you guys to practice, or if you've never used them before, that we're asking you to learn. But that's why we've set it out in what we hope are very clear, easy to follow steps. Okay. So we trust that you guys will be able to understand what's happening there. Good, good. Okay, are there other questions that I've missed? Anyone want to raise anything? Okay, Tanny, you were saying, do you need to specify the taxon as plants, or is this also in the search string? Let me show you here quickly from this is the Excel file that you guys can download. Here on the first tab, it shows you what your data set is. So these are your student numbers, and you can of course just use a Control F to find your student number. So U19, I don't know, 0875, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and unsurprisingly, there's no one with that student number in the class. But yes, just use Control F to find yours. And here for the site list, we've got our search string. And I'm going to I've actually explained what the different terms mean here. But if we zoom in here, you can see that we've got taxon ID is 47126, which means just plants. Okay. When we get to the phonology, you'll see that you change that to a family number. And here on the third sheet, you can actually see what the family IDs are. Okay. And in fact, every species and every genus and even every subspecies is its own unique number. Okay. Let's see, were there other questions? Okay, I think that's all the ones that have come through. Good. Okay, so let's ask you guys, any more questions from your side? Any questions, any concerns? You guys happy that that seems clear enough? We're very excited about this practical. We think it's going to give you guys a really interesting opportunity to interact with a huge data set and really kind of through your own experience learn more about our biomes. Bruce, we are asking please just to have the answers. This is going to be a complex assignment to mark, so we definitely just want the answers. Maybe just to repeat something that is in the instructions, two things that are in the instructions. Please don't repeat the questions in your answers, so don't copy paste. Where is it? Let me just show you guys here. Now here's what the instructions look like, and we please don't want you to copy what is the alpha diversity in each of the 6 sites and paste that in. We really just want you to say 1.1 site A equals 400 species, site B equals 3 species. Okay. There's also really a very important need that you put your unique assignment number at the top of your assignment. Okay. Otherwise, we have to search around for that again. Okay. Yes, okay, you guys are saying there will be additional sessions to discuss this. Yes, that's true. Anything else? Any other questions? Any concerns? Okay, cool. Kenneth, do you want to answer about a phenogram?
Sure, thanks, Pete. So Bruce, a phenogram is basically a way of recording differences in behavior or in responses of a particular organism or set of organisms across a period of time. So effectively, what you're doing is looking at some kind of behavior or response of an organism, and how does that behavior or response change through time. So for example, say you're looking at the budding of trees in the northern hemisphere, for example, in spring. You would then be able to plot that across, say, the entire spring season. You could do that across days as well, so the actual period of time is fairly flexible, but the most common type of phenogram is across the year. So what you're now looking at is differences in behavior or in response of a particular organism across the entire year. So a fantastic example here is going to be exactly what you're going to be doing in this practical. Are there differences in the flowering behavior of plants in different periods of the year? And Professor LaRue has shared a lovely picture there showing a basic phenogram. And you can see for the first example there, which is an amaryllis, the vast majority of flowering observations on iNaturalist are in September and October. So what this means is that you can reliably predict when this plant is going to flower based on previous observations. You can see in the second example, which is of an aloe, it's got an entirely different peak in its flowering time. So April, May, and June, basically. The rest of the year it doesn't flower. And the final example there, a daisy, you can see that it flowers pretty much throughout the year. There's always some time in the year when it's flowering, but there's a distinct peak in November. So the idea here is that you basically arrange along the x-axis some form of a time unit, a repeatable time unit, a day, a week, a month, a season, a year, etc., etc., and then look for repeatable differences in behavior across the particular organism that you're looking for across that period of time. Does that make more sense to you, Bruce?
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Kenneth. Okay, so I see there are two kind of what's the word, threads in the question. Martina, let me answer yours first. You ask, is it okay if you download the data sets on different days? Yes, that is fine. What we really want to aim for is that everyone's got the data sets downloaded within the next week, so that if there are download issues, that those can be handled within the next 7 days. But yes, we've got this set up. So obviously it's a dynamic database. So there are going to be changes. If we the memos that we have for this year are not going to be the same as the memos for next year, right? Because it's going to be a whole new year's worth of data. And there are going to be some tiny differences or potentially going to be some tiny differences. We've now limited the data to only data before this last Sunday to minimize those differences. But if someone comes along and changes an identification or something, it's going to make a small difference. So that's another reason why we want everyone to really try and download all their data within the next week. And then Sapphire, thank you. You've done a good job of answering Johan's question. Johan, you were saying, I think you're saying, what's the difference between question 1 and question 2 in terms of what you need to download? And the answer here is that for question 1, you're downloading data from 6 different sites. So sites A, B, and C in one biome, and sites D, E, and F from another biome. Just at one scale, just at the 4-kilometer radius. Then in question 2, you're just taking 2 of those sites, site A and site D, and you're going to download the data at different radii. In other words, different sample areas. And you're going to generate a species area curve, which is similar, but not exactly the same, as the species, as the species accumulation curves that we did in the second species, in the first and the second species richness practicals. Good, but that's really important. We want to make sure that we identify these issues of confusion. And maybe what I can ask you guys also to do is we will ask for feedback on this practical at a later stage. So if there is something that causes confusion or that's ambiguous, maybe just make a note of it and you can let us know later, and we can update that then. Okay, Anthea, you're asking in question 2, when we change the radii, do we then also have to find the number of observations and remove the duplicates and get the number of species? Yes, that's what you want to graph. So let me just scroll up here. This is what you want as an output, right? As the area changes, what happens to species richness? Okay, and I'm seeing that I forgot to superscript that. And my apologies about that. Okay. Yes. Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. You want a species area curve. So that is one of the most important things that you guys are going to have to, keep track of, is when are we looking at species and when are we using observations only. Okay. But those are good questions. Other questions, other concerns, other thoughts? I think you guys have really touched on all of the components that we thought would be a little bit have the potential for confusion. So I feel like we've probably touched on most things, but we've got time if there are questions. Natasha, are you here? You said you had some problems with downloading. We could definitely have a look at that now, try and diagnose that issue. Okay, Natasha, if you're here, just pop something in the chat function. I can't see your name. Okay, so Natasha's going to have to get in touch. Taishi saying, can we download all the data we need at once, or will we need to download as we go along with the questions? I mean, what I would suggest is that you read through all of the instructions now, and that you then download the data sets, as you say, all at once. I think that's going to be your most efficient way, because as has been raised already, there are going to be a lot of different data sets that need to be carefully managed. And I think downloading them all at once and arranging them, managing, curating them would be a good idea. But there's no, this is your own choice. You guys have got until the middle of next month, so you might choose to do it in different ways. Okay, anything else? Not tobacco, yes. So that's a good question. So for question 2, where you're going to draw a species area curve, you're going to do this for 2 sites. And for each site, I think it is 6 scales, 6 radii. So yeah, Sapphire says it's going to be 12 data sets in total. Okay, good. Okay. If anyone's got a question still that they're busy typing, just raise your hand so we know that we must hang on for it. Of course, remember you're welcome to turn on your mic if you want to ask a question that way. If there's anything I've missed, just remind me, please. Okay, I think we're good. So remember, we've got the discussion board. We're going to have an opportunity, a short opportunity in next week's practical, because it's also going to be the semester test recap session. And then there will be another full session allocated to this and sorting out any issues or problems or questions the week thereafter. Okay. Good luck with it. We hope you enjoy it.